has the nanny state affected your life? Should government protect us from things that might be dangerous, like fish pedicures? I think most Americans would say yes, and maybe not fish pedicures, but would you stand up? You have a more reasonable thing you want to regulate.
Well, I think people should wear helmets when they're riding bicycles or motorcycles.
Nick Gillespie of Reason Magazine, what about that? You don't wear the motorcycle helmet, your head cracks open like a watermelon, and everybody else has to pay for that, and you're dead.
John, you've zeroed in on one of the problems of the nanny state, which is that if we're going to say we're going to pay for everything bad that ever happens to anybody because of their own choices, then you have a claim to say, well, you shouldn't even be riding motorcycles then, because the fact is that if you're riding a motorcycle, you're more likely to be in an accident. The key, if you believe in freedom, if you believe in individual liberty, and you believe in choice and responsibility, and these things go together, then you have to say, let's give people more choices, but also more responsibility. And I think it should be up to the individual to decide, do I want to ride a motorcycle in the first place? Do I want to wear a helmet or not? Various states have different regimes for that type of thing. Anything that multiplies an individual's choice is generally a good thing, as long as you're not sticking other people with the bill for your own decisions.
Well, but what about that? What about the greater good? What if you don't have insurance and you get an infection from this fish pedicure, or you ride that motorcycle and everybody else has to pay for you?
Here, if I get an infection from the fish pedicure, the person who's going to pay is the businessman, because nobody goes in and says, give me that infection. I would really like that as part of the pedicure package, right? So, you know, and which is different than other things. And there's no question that there's a huge role in American life in capitalist societies for charity. All of the philanthropies came out of the wealth that was generated by capitalism. Poor people will not go starving, and they won't go begging for medical attention in a truly free society.
Another big one today is cell phone use in cars, and I use it in the car, and I'm distracted. You want that regulated?
To a degree. I want some things regulated to the extent that they infringe upon other people's rights. So if I'm driving down the road, some guy's on a cell phone, loses control, crashes into me, kills me, that's bad. You know, if he wants to do something self-destructive, which doesn't affect other people, I don't care what he does.
So how is... Thank you. I mean, how is that nanny state? It's not just about me as the driver. I might kill somebody else.
Yeah, well, you know, there's a couple things there. First off, that is not, when you're talking about something where you're in, you know, that's like shouting fire in a crowded theater when there is no fire. It's in a public space, and it's different. The roads are different for the most part than an individual business or what you do in your own house. By the same token, we should look at the fact that, you know, distracted driving ordinances make sense, and it doesn't matter if you are driving under the influence of booze or drugs or texting or listening to music or whatever. If that's a factor in an accident, you should be held extra responsible for that, because you've knowingly put other people at risk as well as yourself.
How do you hold someone extra responsible?
In the same way that if you get into an accident and you're straight, you know, you get one penalty. If you're drunk, you get an intensified penalty, which was not always the case. I think those types of laws make sense because you're knowingly increasing the risk not only for yourself but people around you. By the same token, a lot of these laws don't actually get to the point of, like, how do you actually control people's behavior? A lot of laws, like seatbelt laws, which makes sense. I always wear a seatbelt when I drive because it makes you a lot safer. You're much more likely to survive a crash.
Well, let me just stop you on that. Seatbelt law doesn't make you wear a seatbelt.
That's right.
You choose to wear a seatbelt.
Exactly. The information of people making informed choices is what really dictates this thing. But what I was going to say is that with a lot of these laws that are put in there for our own good, they end up taking on different kind of tenors when you look at the way that they're practiced. So when seatbelt laws went from being what was called a secondary enforcement law, where if you got pulled over for something else and you weren't wearing a seatbelt, you could get an extra ticket for not wearing the seatbelt. Now virtually every state has them as a primary enforcement. So if a cop, you're driving by and a cop says, oh, I think you weren't wearing a seatbelt, they can pull you over. Or you're texting, or you're eating, or you're distracted driving. These types of rules inevitably end up affecting people who drive older cars, poorer people, minorities. They always get pulled over more. So the nanny state even if you take its intentions as pure as the driven snow, a lot of the times the way that they play out is that they end up policing segments of the population who are already under all sorts of duress. This is certainly true with trans fat bans, which are always they're always targeted, the way that the laws are written, to fast food places and to restaurants where relatively poor people, relatively powerless people eat. They don't go after Mario Batali, they don't go after Bobby Flay, they go after Arby's, and they go after you know, an empanada stand.
They are another invitation for the police to come into your life.
It's one more pretext for the state, and the police are the agent of the state. You don't need to be paranoid about this, but there is no question. We live in this bifurcated world where on a certain level we have more control over how we live our lives, what kinds of books we read, what kinds of music we listen to, how we can express ourselves. And then you have, on the other hand, more and more centralized political power of all sorts trying to control our speech, control our thoughts, control our lives. And we always need to be struggling against that if we want to stay free. And I think we do, because freedom is the engine of progress. It's the engine of living a full life.
Thank you, Nick. We will keep covering the nanny state, as will Reason TV. Its website features a nanny of the month. Up next, hating capitalism and Atlas Shrugged.